Welcome. Good evening. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm going to introduce our next Council of Lafayette Women event. It is called The Right Stuff. I'm going to start off by introducing myself. My name is Melanie Shore. I'm the class of 2011, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's presentation, part of our Council of Lafayette Women virtual conference. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy professional and personal lives to connect with Lafayette tonight. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, please know that we have utilized the audience mute feature in order to ensure that the presentation is not interrupted by any background noise. We invite you to include your full name and class year on your profile by renaming yourself. For the best viewing experience, please select Speaker View in the top right corner of your screen. This will allow the current speaker to be front and center on your screen. We welcome questions and ask that you use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen to type in any that you may have. Please know that this presentation will be recorded so that you and the rest of the Lafayette community will have access to it later. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker, we have Rebecca Price Janney, class of 80. Little bit about Rebecca. At 15, Rebecca Price Janney faced off with the editor of her local newspaper. She wanted to write for the paper, and he nearly laughed her out of the office. However, she came back with her ace portfolio of celebrity interviews she had written for a bigger paper's teen supplement. By the next month, she was covering the Philadelphia Phillies. She's the author of 24 books, including her latest, Easton at the Pass, the fourth book in her award-winning Easton series. She's a graduate of Lafayette College and Princeton Theological Seminary, and she received her doctorate from Mizio Seminary, where she focused on the role of women in American history. Sorry if I butchered that. She lives with her husband, son, and Cavalier King Charles Spaniel in Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley. Next up, we have Leanne Pike Treese, Esquire, class of 91. Leanne is a cum laude graduate of Lafayette College and the Dickinson School of Law. While at Lafayette, Leanne was awarded the Gilbert Prize and the Comic Spirit Award for creative writing. In law school, she was a member of the Dickinson Law Review, and after graduation worked as an attorney for over 20 years. Her debut book, Their Last Chance, a novel, was hailed by Kirkus Reviews as a nuanced and empathetic novel that balances the difficult and the heartwarming. Leanne's short story, Lovelocks on the Roberto Clemente Bridge, is included in the 2020 anthology, Love on Main. Next up, we have Elizabeth King Lynch, class of 04. Liz Lynch is an avid illustrator, author with a degree in studio art from Lafayette College. She spent over 10 years as a marketing professional before tackling the hardest job in the world, figuring out creative ways to get her children to try new food, which reignited her dream to create children's books. Understanding and respecting a young child's mind, Liz strives to create illustrations that are equally educational, real, and fun. Since the release of her 2 books, she has independently sold nearly 40,000 copies through various channels. Liz, her husband, and 3 young children reside in the Philadelphia area, and when she isn't drawing, she loves traveling, reading, the beach, and of course, good food. Last but certainly not least, we have Professor Lee Upton. Lee Upton is the author of 14 books, including short story collections, volumes of poetry, literary criticism, and essays. Her most recent collection, Visitation Stories, was listed by Kirkus as one of the best of the Indies 2017. Her collections of stories, The Tao of Humiliation, was selected by Kirkus as among the best books of 2014. One of 11 books in the subcategory of short stories that included international authors, among them Alice Munro and Hilary Mantel. Lee Upton's novella, The Guide to the Flying Island, received the Miami University Press Novella Award. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel and give it away to Professor Upton.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and many thanks to Rachel and Ellen and the Council of Lafayette Women and all who've done so much to make this possible. And thank you all for being with us. I'll be serving as moderator for tonight's discussion. We want the discussion to be informal, and we'll reserve time toward the end for your questions, of course. But first, we want to fulfill what the session's title promises. That is, the title is Finding the Words and Getting Them Published. So in a kind of round robin, I'm first going to be asking each of our panelists about how they found the words and keep finding the words, with any advice for any of us. And then after we've talked about that, then we'll talk about publishing and also along with publishing a bit about marketing work as well too. So I'd like to first, let's talk to Rebecca. Rebecca, you are in the midst of writing your 25th book. Isn't that remarkable? You're so prolific. Can you tell us a bit about how you found the words, how you came to writing, then how you're able to keep on at such a pace writing?
Thank you, Lee. I think they found me, actually. When I was very young, I loved words. I loved reading. I remember crying when I was very, very little when I picked up a book and I couldn't read it yet. And I just couldn't wait to be able to read. And yet my earliest ambition was not to be a writer, but an astronaut. And I was very serious about that and carried that with me throughout elementary school. And then when it came time to get into high school, I met with an advisor who was trying to steer me in the right path concerning what curriculum I would pursue in high school. And she asked me what I wanted to be, and I said an astronaut. And she just looked at me and said, "But there are no female astronauts." This was just a few years before Sally Ride. And I remember at that time thinking that, well, she could be wrong, but she sat there telling me why, besides there being no women astronauts, it wasn't practical, that my math grades were not the best. They weren't terrible, they were above average, but I really struggled to keep them that high. And she asked me at that point if I had ever considered writing, that my teachers all said that I seemed to have a gift for writing. And I started to think about that. I wasn't really sure. My frame of reference since I was very little was my Christian faith, so I took it to God. And I said, you know, I think I'm looking for a sign. If you want me to be a writer instead of an astronaut, give me a sign. And in the next few months, I won 3 separate writing competitions. So that was definitely my sign. And that, I would say, is how the words found me. And I think prolific might be a good adjective to describe me. I don't think that I've ever really run out of ideas. If anything, I run out of time to be able to write down and fully explore all of the ideas that I have. So for me, there's always something that's still ahead.
Just a bit of a follow-up. Do you believe in writer's block? I mean, at all for yourself? Have you ever experienced that, or do you find that you're summoned to the words regularly? And I guess tagging that on just a bit, can you tell us a little bit about your processes, how you prepare yourself? So a two-pronged question before we move to our next panelist.
I would say that I haven't experienced the classic writer's block, but I have experienced some dryness.
Mhm.
For example, in April of last year, my father passed away. And with all that was happening in our nation, on top of my grief, I found that my well was very, very dry. And that was the first time across all these many years that I realized that I had to just go away by myself a little bit internally and shut myself off as much as I could from the world for about a month or two, not from my immediate family or my responsibilities, but I needed to fill my tank. And I think that was the closest I've ever come. The words were still there, but in order for me to express them, I had to be refreshed and restored.
And just a little bit about your processes. Are you writing every day? Do you have a time of day to write?
I would say every weekday. My goal is as soon as my teenager gets on the bus, I head up to my home office and begin to write, because that's when my mind is the most fertile. I think I'm a morning person that way. So yes, I write until I dry up, basically, for that day. There's something inside me that says enough. You have to wait until the next day, the next session. But throughout the day, I'm percolating. The ideas are always percolating. And it could be just before I go to bed at night that a certain scene comes together, or a character has a new nuance. And I always keep paper and pen by my side so that I can write things down.
Thank you so much. I'd like to move on to Leanne now. Leanne, you have such an interesting career path because, of course, you were an attorney for about 20 years, and your novel itself is really complexly layered with different perspectives. So you bring in so much experience in your life, not only the experience through law, but through other venues as well. Could you tell us a bit about how you found words and how you keep on finding words? I know your novel, actually, I have people's work. Here it is. Is now in a new edition. So if you could tell us a bit about your path.
Sure. Like Rebecca, when I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a writer, but I never, that book was published when I was 50. So it went from a long time from being little to getting my first book published. And it finally it had been something I always wanted to do. But how I actually got there is I just made this resolution that I was going to write 500 words a day. And that was it. And if they were the worst words ever, that was okay, as long as I wrote at least 500. And then, as Rebecca also said, once you start, for me, once I started doing it every day, the thoughts would remain, the story would remain with me throughout the day, and different ideas would come up as I would, move on about my day, and then I would be able to revise. And then I found I was enjoying myself. So I was writing more than 500 words a day. So that everyday thing was really helpful. Two really practical tools if you're talking about just finding words. I mean, this is silly, but I always have a thesaurus open on my computer, and you might just have a word like, the first word that comes to mind is beautiful, but that's not the best word. So you just look, maybe you want to say stunning, or you want to say exquisite. So that's just a really simple thing. And the other thing that I really love, it's this master list for writers. This is my favorite writing tool. There's so many lists in here, but one of the lists has like great ways to convey emotions that aren't just saying like, I was scared, but like lists of like how you might describe how someone was most fearful or happy or angry. Somebody's like clenching their fists or those types of things. And it has tons of other lists, but I find that to be a really go-to guide for me as I'm writing, as two easy things. And then the last thing I would say for anyone that is trying to write, like, don't worry so much about like the original words, because the first words will always be replaced by better words as you go through your drafts. And I'll tell you, both with this book, and I have a new book coming out in June, but with both of them, my original draft is probably only a third of what I originally wrote made it into these final drafts, because I would just keep going back and revising and tightening and making it better. So I think the most important thing for anyone's process would be just to let go of worrying if the words are good. They'll be good if you just keep going back to it. So that would be my thoughts.
Did you find that if you had to enumerate, how many revisions did you do on your first novel?
Oh my gosh. Well, I did not know what I was doing. I'll be totally honest. Like, I had the goal to write the 500 words. And then I realized that I wrote too much. So then I had to delete a lot, which made it better. So, and then I actually changed the entire novel. It was written in the first person. I changed the entire thing to be written in the third person, which actually was helpful because I really had to get in there and look at it all. But I couldn't even say how many, because this book was traditionally published. So I had my own revisions. Then I had revisions through the publishers, had revisions, and then there was another round of revisions. So I couldn't say, but I can say that if you read the original draft, you would not want to read it. But hopefully you'd want to read this one.
Thank you so much. Liz, I want to ask you about finding words, but also because you're a visual artist, you're also finding images. So could you talk to us about finding the words and finding the images?
Sure. It's kind of funny because it's more like my drawings help me find the words first. So I, like the other two panelists, always wanted to be a writer. But I knew specifically I wanted to be a children's book writer from a very young age. It was that or a zookeeper, as most little kids want to be, which is funny because I've found this really odd medium of I draw animals. So it's this very suited, looking back at my past, I've found this little niche, which is pretty unbelievable. But I went to, at Lafayette, I was an international economics major and I went into marketing and I loved it. And then I had kids and it was a challenge. So I went back to work. I was at work for 3 years and we had our second child and decided to make a big break in my life and stay at home. And it was my husband who said to me, "This is your chance. Why don't you try to figure out this is the time to write children's books?" And I didn't have any of the ideas yet. I just knew I had the time in the window. And my then 2.5-year-old, almost 3-year-old daughter was becoming a picky eater. So I was sketching and drawing and coming up with these funny situations. And the very first one that we did was her favorite animal, which was a panda, and a food that I love, which is pickles, which is so silly. And I drew a picture and she was engaged and she was interested. And I thought, wow, I have an idea. So really the words came to me after a series of drawings, which is pretty unique. My books are alphabet books. So the words aren't very deep, but they have a lot of meaning because they're words that encourage young children to try new things and also to learn their alphabet, to learn the English language and how words don't always make sense and they have different sounds. It's just an interesting path because really it was a emotional experience with my family, and it was my love of art that brought the words out for me, even if they're very simple. But
that's wonderful. I've looked, I watch a bit of YouTube about your work, and I'll tell you, it made me hungry. I felt like I don't want to be a picky eater.
So I can show, this is the first one, is Pandas Love Pickles. And it just very simply goes through. It's repetitive, so it gives kids a chance to learn. They think they're reading, so it's just, I know it's backwards, but the drawings I all sketched by hand and then re-edit. Some of them are a little bit different, but it's been a real passion and it's been really fun. It's been an adventure, and I get to find out about all these young children who are trying new foods because of the book.
Well, it's really clever and engaging, and writing for children, they have to be the most candid audience who will let you know what they feel and what they think. So thank you so much. I'd like to go to the next question that's part of the title of the session is about publishing and with that marketing too, because it seems now, the publishing landscape has changed so much. The gatekeepers are different or sometimes not even existent. But writers want readers, so it's a way to whether it's online or in print, somehow getting the work out. So Rebecca, let's come back to you, and can you tell us about your route toward publishing and marketing, and any advice you have for any of us?
My road to publishing
Yes.
has really changed. I would say from the initial years when I was writing for newspapers and magazines, and then when my first books were published in the mid 90s, it was a different world than it is now. And I think that social media has really opened up a lot more opportunities for marketing. But I also think that the publishing opportunities for publishing in some ways have opened up and expanded, and in other ways they've shrunk. And I think that the more traditional path is even harder now, but we can be more creative. I have a very close friend who's been published for a long time, very successful author, and he's recently gone from traditional publishing to self-publishing because he has the audience and he wants more autonomy and more control over his work. So in that sense, it's definitely more creative. I'm not really sure where I'm going with all of this. It's just I've seen a lot of changes along the way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Leanne, what can you tell us about publishing and marketing?
Yeah, so my book was originally published by a small press, and how I found the small press was there was a Twitter contest that they have a few times a year. It's called #PIT, PITMAD, mad.
Mm-hmm.
And if you tweet about your book with the hashtag, if like a publisher or an agent is interested, they will like your post. So I actually I got 2 offers of publication from small presses through that process, and that happened pretty early on. The small press I chose ultimately went out of business. And then I re-released the book as an indie author. So I have both perspectives, and there's pros and cons for each depending on what your goals are. Like, I enjoyed being part of this small press because I liked having the editor look at it and that collaboration there. I liked the community of authors. We were all supporting each other and tweeting about each other, and it was a nice community. But there's a lot that you can't do as a traditionally published author that I didn't realize. Like, I had no control over the price of my book. So if I wanted to have a sale, I couldn't do that. I couldn't advertise on Amazon. There were a lot of things that were closed off that I found a little frustrating. So I thought it was kind of a nice chance for me when the rights got back to me to give a try to the indie publishing, because I thought it'd be hard to get anyone else to publish it since it had been published. And I have really enjoyed that process. I'll show you just a little. This is my new cover. I just got this for my new book that's coming out in June. And what's been nice about this is I can hire all my own people. So I hired my own cover designer. I did hire an editor to help me collaborate on the new book. So I find a lot of nice things about indie publishing that are positive. So I think there's pros and cons to both. I don't have experience with like a big publisher that I'm sure is, different, but those are my experiences.
Thank you. Well, Liz, can you tell us about your experiences with publishing? And I know you were a marketing professional, so you probably have a lot of insight.
Sure. My publishing journey started independently. That was for me, as I mentioned, I was a new stay-at-home mom and I didn't have a source of income. So my timing for going through an agent and getting the book picked up and then going to publishing houses, I didn't, to be completely blunt, I didn't have time to do that. I needed to start helping produce for our family. So I knew exactly what I wanted, and I knew that I wanted to have the flexibility, like Leanne was saying. I wanted to be able to advertise my own work. I wanted to be able to go through certain channels of marketing that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So the first thing I did is I took a risk, and I thought I was going to have a basement filled with books, and I used for the first time I used Print Ninja, and I printed 1,000 copies of my first book and sold them in 3 months. So I thought, okay, I can do this. And it was a good taste about how to self-publish and get through the journey. I learned a lot. I started working with my own vendor in printing. And now I do about 10,000 copies every 6 to 8 months. And then I sell through Amazon. I sell through boutiques. I do children's book clubs. So I sell about 5,000 copies of a time through there. So it's like you get your book in the mail and you pick what you like. But because of this, I've had a lot of different exposure. Now I have 2 books and I have a 3rd one coming out in the middle of April through a different publishing company who basically bought the idea. But it's an exclusive Pandas Love Peas. Don't tell anybody. It's a book that's all healthy food options. What I wanted to do in my books was different, and I had the flexibility to do what I wanted because I was self-publishing. But they wanted it to be all healthy food options. So there's a new book coming out that way, but I still have the rights to sell board book specific because they didn't want to do board books. It's been quite a process, and I know that there's might be questions about independent publishing the way that I've done it, and I'm happy to answer those further if anyone has questions in email or whatever. So it's been, as far as marketing goes, it was quite a lesson in learning how to navigate Amazon. That's mostly where I have to spend my money. I do some social media marketing as well, and then a lot of word of mouth marketing.
Oh, that's fascinating. Pulling this all together, and you've been so successful. All 3 of you have been really, really successful. Many congratulations to all of you. In a minute, we'll open it up for questions, but maybe before we move on, is there from each of you, and I'll start again with Rebecca, is there maybe a piece of advice that you have found very helpful? And alternately, if it occurs to you, have you ever got any really bad advice, the worst advice? So start with you, Rebecca, best advice. And if you can think of worst advice, that may calm some hearts who've heard some bad advice.
What immediately comes to mind is that when I was growing up, I grew up in a household filled with books, and my mother was very much an Ernest Hemingway type aficionado. She didn't like a lot of excess in books. She didn't like descriptive things very much. And I began working for an editor, my first editor, who was very much like that, very terse, very get to the point. And as a result, I think that my writing became very technically correct. My grammar was very good. I had the mechanics down, but it wasn't exactly what I would call exciting. And so one day after I had graduated from Princeton, I had been writing a little bit for the alumni magazine, and the editor took me out to lunch. And I thought that he was going to say some really nice things about my writing. And instead, he said to me, you have some really good writing talent there, but I have to be honest with you, Rebecca, your writing is boring. And I was devastated. I was so shocked that he would put it to me that way. And yet he gave me some of the best advice I ever had as a writer. And it was that I needed to find my creative voice. And in order to do that, he suggested that I immerse myself in good writing. And as a child, I had never really read a lot of the classic children's books, and like Anne of Green Gables. I didn't even know what that was. My parents raised me on biographies, and I just found that I had missed so much. And I would say over the next couple of years, I really did begin to find that creative voice. And I think that that has really stayed with me. And it's given me a desire to always work with a good editor, because I hope that I never get to the point where I think, as far as my talent goes, I have arrived. Because if I ever get to that point, then I should stop writing, because I need that collaboration with somebody who can call me up short and say, this is not good, you can do better.
Thank you. Leanne, the same question, your best advice, and if you can think of the worst advice, that's interesting too.
Sure. So again, like, as I said before, one of the things that's really worked for me is the writing every day, or at least as consistently as you can. Another piece of advice I remember reading in creating a story, if you think about it almost like a play or a movie, like a character never stops and explains to you like what they're doing or why they're doing it. Like, you just know from watching the action. And you should respect your readers enough to know that they're going to know what you're doing. You don't have to over explain, like, Sam was upset. You can give enough details without being so specific. So always think about that. Like, would a character in a play turn around and tell the audience, I'm upset right now? Or would they be doing something to make them seem upset? So that's something I think about a lot in writing. And then I never really received advice I would say was bad, but one thing I would be wary about is I did go to it was a writers conference in New York, even before I was done this book. And a number of agents that were at the conference said, oh, my book has 4 points of view. And they're like, you're never going to sell a book with 4 points of view. But I wanted the 4 points of view because they were important to the story for reasons I won't say during this. But I think it's good to just be a little bit sure of yourself. You know what your story needs. And I wasn't going to cut out. They wanted me to, the person was suggesting I cut out 2 points of view. So I think just be a little bit confident in your own writing would be my other piece of advice.
Thank you. And what about you, Liz?
Someone told me before I actually even started to spend some time in a bookstore, which is kind of hard to do right now, but just to look and feel and touch and pick up the books that really speak to you immediately and flip through them, and why does it work and what feels good about it. I think it can work with obviously it works really well with children's books because you can flip through pretty easily and see like what feels good and what speaks to you. How does the book feel itself? Especially with children's books, because they pick them up so much and it's so much a part of their day and their night and how they feel. On a personal level, a lot of people were very critical about me wanting to draw in the sketch style and to draw, very specific black and white animals and to draw these vibrant foods. But it was really important to me to stay to what was like what Leanne was saying, be confident in your choices and to say what was important to me and on brand for what I knew might work for a series. So even if someone else can't visualize it, it's really important to stick to your guns. And specifically with kids, I would highly recommend that you put your work out there and let people see it before it's published. Put your ideas out. Kids are the first people to tell you they like something or don't like something. And they gave me a lot of good feedback about what didn't work to them. So it was really crowdsourcing and talking to people before I really charged ahead with the full publishing.
Thank you so much. This is really helpful in such different perspectives as well, too. I'm going to open up the chat function, and people can still continue to add more to the chat. Let's see. Oh, people are loving the illustrations.
Thank you.
We're asked, do any of you have agents who shop your manuscripts to publishers?
Yes, I do. I have been working with, I would say this is my third agent and the one that I've had the longest. And he's just a wonderful confidant. He's just really great.
And I suppose I'll just follow up with that a bit. How did you get your agent?
This particular agent was the editor of 3 of my nonfiction books. And he worked for a couple of publishing houses as an editor before he went off on his own as an agent. And about the time that he did that, I came to a point with the agent that I had earlier that I thought that we had probably taken our professional relationship as far as it could go. And I approached him. We had been friends for a long time. And I asked him if he thought that he might be effective for me, because he was one of my biggest cheerleaders. And so that collaboration started, I'd say about 5 or 6 years ago. And I've been very pleased.
Thank you. Anyone else have an agent? Okay. Let's see. That question was from Renee. Let's see. What are some? We're asked from Sarah. What are some positive changes you'd like to see in the publishing industry from any of you?
Sorry, I'm like trying to think of something. I guess I'm thinking, I mean, I think it's opening up more to a lot of people. I think the advent of independent publishing and allowing people to get their work out there makes it a little bit less exclusive. It allows for more different types of work. So I feel like it's trending in the right direction.
And opening to more voices, a greater variety of voices. And there is a way in which I think through social media, writers can, address their audience more directly in some ways too. So there's a bit more possibility, representation of various groups that's opening up as more too. Even more direct conversation with one's readers also, I think is possible. I'll just move on to a few more questions.
Well, can I say one thing? I'm sorry. I think that traditionally, once you had independently published a book, there was absolutely no way that book was going to be picked up by a publisher. And it's starting to change a little bit now. As I said, a publisher is now publishing one of my books. It's a little bit different, but I think that's a really positive thing that they're starting to see, that it's trending, that so many people are independently publishing, that you can really still have a success in a different way and still, be independent and publish traditionally. And to keep that moving forward, I think is really important, because you feel a little bit like it's a risk to self-publish because, oh my gosh, what if it can't be successful in a different channel? And they're starting to kind of ease up on that a little bit.
I think that makes sense, and you see some real success stories too. The people creating platforms and then moving from there, and then different publishers vying for those authors. Here's a question from Renee directly to Rebecca. Rebecca, how did you make the transition from newspaper magazine writing to fiction?
Actually, there were a few steps in between, because my first books were fictional young adult books. I came out with what was called the Heather Reed Mystery Series, in the mid 90s, and they were dubbed Nancy Drew for the 90s. And I had 8 books in that series. And then I went on to write 3 books of historical YA fiction. And then I went on for a season to write nonfiction books about American history. So I went fiction, nonfiction, back to fiction. And so I've gone back and forth a little bit in my career. And I'm not sure how well I answered your question, but it's been interesting to go from one to another and then back. And I've really enjoyed that particular path.
Thank you. Let's see. Just a note that this program is going to be recorded. Rachel's letting us know, and it'll be available early next week in the Alumni Relations webpage, and we'll be sent the link. Other questions. This is from Rachel to all of you. Can you talk about the role of audiobooks in your work?
I'll take that one. I'm really happy that the first 2 books in my Easton series have just become audiobooks. And I enjoy listening to the narrator bring these books to life. It's been a really neat experience. And now we're working through the contract for him to do the 3rd book. And it's been really fun. I got to audition a few potential readers, narrators, and I actually found one right here in Easton in my own backyard. And he's wonderful. And my publishing house is a little bit jealous because they said, oh, he's quite a find. So I think they'd like to keep him around for a while. And this is the book that he'll be doing next, Easton at the Crossroads.
That's terrific. There's a question from Vicky. How important is social media to the marketing of your books after they're published? She writes, you probably heard about TikTok in New York last weekend regarding book sales. So how important is social media, do all of you find?
I find that it serves a really good connection point for me, specifically finding a niche about who I want to talk about the books. So I will go through Instagram or Facebook or what have you and find out who's talking about picky eaters. And there's a lot of parents talking about picky eaters and who's a major influencer in that category. So what I do is develop relationships with those people. I will send them a book or I'll create content around that, and then they'll do the same thing. It really helps promote the book, because otherwise that's an audience that I'm not really hitting. In addition, it opens up some unique opportunities. I'm partnering with one of those food blogger influencers, to do a cookbook based on all of the letters of the book. So it's a unique way to get yourself out there and talk to new people and meet a whole new slew of people who haven't heard about your work otherwise.
Oh, wonderful. This comes from Bessie. She wonders if anyone has any recommendation on writing conferences or programs. And have you all attended writing conferences that were useful to you, or programs? I know some people find that they meet agents at writing conferences too, as well.
I think writing conferences are really important, and that's where I made my early connections into the publishing industry, and where you get to not only do workshops to improve your art, but to meet people who are the movers and shakers in the publishing houses, the people who can let you know what is of interest to editors. What are they buying now? What are they looking for? What should you avoid? And you also can build up a kind of a retinue of fellow writers who can surround you with support. So I usually tell people who ask me, how do I get published, to get themselves to a writer's conference.
one thing I would add to that is, in addition to conferences, depending on, I mean, virtually any genre that you would be writing in has a lot of groups you can join online. So I'm involved in the Women's Fiction Writers Association. So through them, they have conferences, they have a lot of free trainings, there's a lot of webinars. So I think if you are interested, it doesn't have to be women's fiction, but if you're writing, science fiction and you look on Facebook, you'll find these groups, and it's the same type of thing as the conference, but you can also find like conferences very specific to your genre, which I think is helpful. So that's just an add-on.
And I'm a member of the SCBWI, which is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and it's essentially what you're saying. But it's a chance to get some feedback also from people within your own field. And tons of Facebook groups have lots of independent publishing groups as well that you can put some information out there and get a lot of feedback.
Yeah.
So from Bonnie, a follow-up to Liz's comment about reaching out to people on social media. Do you just PM them and ask bluntly for their address to send them your book? Or
Yeah,
how about this?
I usually try to go through their content and make sure that I'm making a connection that is relevant to what they're doing. Because otherwise they're just, if there's someone that has 1 million followers, it's just one more thing. Sometimes I'll search out influencers and just not even reach out to them first. I'll just send them a copy of the book and maybe they'll put a picture of it up. Maybe they won't. But I've actually had quite a bit of success doing it that way as well. But I do reach out to someone that has a relevant conversation so that I'm not just some stranger saying, please sell my book. I'm some stranger saying, I have something that I think is important to you and I think it's important to your followers as well.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay. Rachel has a question for me. Hey, Rachel. She asked, now that I retired from Lafayette, how has that impacted your writing career? I should say that I love my colleagues. I love my students. I'm still in contact with everyone. I retired in June. My standard joke is that I really love retirement and wish I'd done it 40 years ago. But actually, I'm just really grateful for having been at Lafayette and the wonderful students I've had and the friendships I've formed and my inspiring colleagues. I will say it has been wonderful to write full time. I mean, I'm so grateful. And I think, it looks like we all pretty much write full time. And it's just given me a lot of joy. So I have a lot of different projects now, and the things feel differently. I have a question. What about, we talked a little bit about this, but has the pandemic affected your writing for any of you? Have you felt, has your writing changed in any way? Has it somehow, all our lives have been changed, certainly, but I'm wondering about how it has changed us as writers. Does anyone have a response to that?
I think that it changed my routine. I'm used to having large patches of time by myself in the house while my husband and my son are at work and at school. And I'm used to taking my thoughts from one room to the next uninterrupted, except maybe by my dog barking at a squirrel outside or something. But with my husband working remotely now, and my son is back at school now, but for months he was at home too. It changed the scene. My kind of writing landscape changed, and I've had to adapt to that. And I finally came up with the idea of a thinking cap that I told my husband, when I have that cap on, it means that I'm in the middle of a thought and you shouldn't talk to me about what's happening at work.
Liz or Leanne, any way in which the pandemic has affected your writing?
I think situationally, go ahead, Leanne.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the same really as Rebecca with the you know, the change in routine was a little different. But during the period where all my kids came home, I have 2 kids in college and one in high school, but my 2 college age daughters were actually a little helpful to me because I was writing my book, and they were very kind to read it for me and give me some advice. So that was kind of a fun, like, it turned, you know, what has been a difficult situation for everyone into something that was a little bit collaborative, because, you know, we'd walk the dog and I'd be like, well, what do you think I should do with this? Or did you like this character? And I enjoyed bringing my kids into it in a way that they hadn't been with my first book.
Thank you. Liz?
I just was going to say the same thing. Situationally, it really robbed me of my time to create. So I haven't gotten to be as creative. Plus, I had a pandemic baby, so that kind of put a hard stop on creativity as well. But it has completely shifted how I promote myself and how I sell. I used to do a lot of festivals, and I can't do those. I can't do school readings. So I've shifted a lot to online sales and figuring out how to then put myself out there in a way that I haven't been doing. And I don't love being the face of social media. I don't like it at all. But having to kind of get out of my comfort zone and do that a little bit more. I've been doing some interviews. So finding new ways and new outlets to stretch your creativity. Even if I can't create, it's about now marketing and figuring out how to sell more.
Thank you. Melanie is going to sign off for us in a moment, but I just wanted to thank you all. It's a real pleasure to talk with you. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and wishing everyone lots of inspiration and lots of joy, and especially as, you know, spring seems to be coming, and really we're hoping that we move out of this pandemic as soon as we can. So Melanie, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of our speakers and thank you, our audience, for joining us for this evening's presentation. Please join us tomorrow for the conference finale with Professor Allison Byerly. You can view and register for this CLW event by visiting leopardlink.lafayette.edu. And we will be sending you an evaluation within the next 24 hours, so check your inboxes. And we appreciate all of you taking time for the presentation tonight, and then also just taking a few minutes to share your feedback on tonight's session. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening and a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.